Good evening. We're pleased that you're all with us tonight. Welcome to the TTC for the National Atomic Museum Foundation's sponsorship of Brigadier General Paul W. Tibbets. Tonight is a special opportunity to hear from the General, and I'm glad that we've sold out the TTC. Being a good Sandian, let me first go through ES&H points. The exits are to the back of the hall tonight, and so if we have to leave, that's how you get out of this place. Many of you may have been at the museum earlier today, and if you were, you may have been able to purchase a book and have the General sign it. If you weren't able to do it, you'll be amazed to know that we sold 440 books today, and there aren't any left, or there's only a few. Please understand, however, that if you'd like to have a book signed by General Tibbets, you still can do so. If you'll come to the museum and pay in advance, we will have some available, and they will be brought into Albuquerque, and you can come to the museum and get them. It may take a week to two to do that, but if you'd like to have one, we encourage you to do so. Also, the General will be there from 11 to 2 tomorrow. He will be signing photographs, which are available, and he'll also shake your hand, and you can take your picture with him. So please come to the museum tomorrow if you'd like to visit with him. We have some opportunities tonight to have some memorabilia from the 509th and from the material that General Tibbets has brought with him. At the end of tonight's program, there will be a raffle. We have 11 objects. I hope you'll enjoy the things that we have, and especially General Tibbets has donated to the National Atomic Museum Foundation a limited edition book. It is number 6 of 500, signed by all 4 of the remaining surviving crew members. And that will be our grand prize tonight, so you won't want to miss out on the raffle at the end of the evening. For those of you who aren't aware, we do a Trinity tour later in April at the museum, so if you'd like to go to Trinity, please come to the museum and you can buy that ticket. Also, membership is available and you'll get invitations to things like this. So, without any further ado, let me tell you a little bit about our special guest tonight. General Tibbets was the sole responsible person for the organization, the training, and the command of the world's first nuclear strike. On the morning of August 6th, Colonel Tibbets, at that time, flew the Enola Gay into the future and started the atomic age. He dropped the world's first nuclear bomb on Hiroshima, and that was the beginning of a story that he has told many times over. Brigadier General Paul Tibbets is a receipt of this Distinguished Service Cross, Distinguished Flying Oak Cross, Air Medal with 3 oak clusters, Purple Heart, Legion of Merit, European Command Medal. He has been accommodated by the Joint Chiefs, and he has the Air Force Outstanding Unit Award. He has many, many achievements in his illustrious career. Would you please join me in welcoming tonight Brigadier General Paul W. Tibbets.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. Ladies and gentlemen, young and old, everybody, I'm delighted as hell to be here. There has been so much misunderstanding and so many misstatements made about those days of 1945 and the so-called use of the atomic weapons that I'm delighted to appear anytime I can to try to set the record straight and tell you exactly what happened, and that's what you'll get tonight. You're going to get the truth and the cold, hard facts, no matter how they sound. We're going to start our show. Somebody said that I was going to have a seminar, deliver a lecture and all that. I don't deliver lectures. I want to tell people what they want to hear, and the only way I can do that is to get questions from the audience so that I can address that, and then you will hear what you ask to hear. We're going to show a film. That film is going to be about 14 minutes long. And I must tell you this, the film was produced to help dispel a lot of the things that were getting out and being said about those days, the crews and all that sort of thing. This film was produced by a a visual arts company up in Connecticut called Greenwich Workshop. They approached me and the other members still living on both airplanes to see if we'd be willing to do such a thing as you will see tonight. Now, this is only a portion of a 56-minute documentary. And they wanted to do it because they saw some confusion existing in the things that they read in the media or they heard on radio or TV or something else about what we were supposed to have said when interviewed. And one of the tricks was they'd put you up in front of a camera, whether it was in a studio or whether it was in a room just to make a tape. And they would ask you certain questions and you would tell the answer the best you could to those questions. But when they came out on the screen for the public to see, my mouth was moving and everybody, got the same treatment. But the words that we said were not broadcast. It was those words that the news media wanted to put out to the public. So that's where we stand with this thing. Now, I'm not going to belabor that issue. I'd rather use the time to address your questions. So if you'll forgive me, I'm going to walk off of the here and now. They're going to start the film, and I'll come back when it's finished. I've seen it before.
When we went overseas, realized this was June, my letters to home, see, I'm telling my folks that I'll be there a year. This is what I thought. Now, I do know my friends that were in the Navy and that they thought it was a long war. They thought it was going to last at least another year. I think all of us at that time thought we were in for a long war and a dirty war, a mean war, and a killing war. Each island we got closer to Japan, the casualties increased.
Now the war went on and was going on, and you have to understand that during that period, people in the service were just really fed up with this. But under those conditions, if we could do anything to significantly shorten the war or end it, why, I think anybody would have jumped at the possibility. We can talk to young people, explain it to them and things, but until they've been involved in it, they just can understand what a total country effort this was. The war was, and everybody was involved in it. Not just the people in the service, although that involved just about everybody between the ages of 18 and 35, but the people working on the home front, building airplanes, building tanks, building weapons of war. That's all it was.
We're in General Ent's office, and he is instructing me as to my assignment. You are going to organize and train a unit to drop these atomic bombs simultaneously in both Europe and Japan. And he told me about using my my code word of silver plate, and cautioned me. He said, "Paul, you got a tremendous amount of responsibility there. You got a tremendous amount of authority. Be careful of how you use it." I was never challenged. Nobody ever asked me, can I drop the bomb? Or, have you made a decision who's going to drop it? If they had, I'd have told them, yes. Decision was made the first day I heard about it, and that's going to be me.
Paul told us we were going to drop a new type of weapon. He said that if anybody wanted to back out, nothing would be said. Nobody backed out.
I was brought into the radio shack. You're supposed to be Colonel Tibbets' radio operator. How many hours have you had in the air? I said, 10 at radio school. I was naive. So I didn't know what I was supposed to expect.
Wendover, Utah appeared to me when I got there as the ideal location. Isolated out on the Nevada state line, on the salt flats of Utah, and there wasn't very much there. There was nothing to attract any particular attention out there, and I thought, this is the place I want to be. It would be easy to keep a secret sitting at Wendover.
Nobody ever mentioned the word nuclear. Nobody ever mentioned the word atomic. We just knew it was going to be a big explosion, a lot of destructive force.
During the bomb runs and tests, we were trying to get the ballistics for the two weapons. For the airspeed, you'd have to put in a different drift. You'd have to put in a different trail, which is how far the bomb, where it comes out from behind the airplane. But it took me, I'd say, 2 to 3 months with the background I had to actually realize and believe that they were actually onto something as big as I'd heard. Because with my background, as far as me to visualize it, one bomb could do what they said.
My organization, the 509th Composite Group, was ready to go to war by the month of May, 1945. And I sent the word in to move the 509th organization overseas. I wanted them to get shot at. I wanted them to experience possible emergencies and everything before they had an atom bomb in their airplane and were really playing for keeps. I wanted the Japanese to see individual airplanes. I wanted them to think maybe that most of those single airplanes that they were looking at were reconnaissance airplanes, because they weren't interested in reconnaissance airplanes at that time. Hiroshima was definitely a military objective. It was also the place in which they were assembling all of their military equipment to resist an invasion.
We were given information about air-sea rescue units and what we would do in case of trouble with the bomb, trouble with the airplane, trouble from enemy action. Had the final briefing at midnight, followed by then the breakfast and down to the flight line.
You knew it was big. It was going to be a big one, and so you were, I think, you were at a level a little higher than you do on a conventional mission. The biggest part of that after the briefing was coming out to the aircraft and seeing this tremendous amount of people around it, Klieg lights with shining all over the airplane, a big crowd of people out there. You know, you were the center of attention. You were the monkeys in the zoo.
And I was sitting there in the seat ready to start engines. And of course, some of the cameras were still out there. And I stuck my head out to ask them, please remove the cameras and the floodlights and all that so we could start cranking up. And at the same time, somebody yelled at me and said, hey, wave at us.
Everyone to the field!
I had a bunch of lives on board this airplane that I had to give careful consideration to. And in that regard, I couldn't help but reflect on Chaplain Downey's prayer.
Clear the field! Right there! Clear it!
We pray thee that the end of the war may come soon, and that once more we may know peace on earth. May the men who fly this night be kept safe in thy care, and may they be returned safely to us. We shall go forward, trusting in thee, knowing that we are in thy care now and forever. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
I watched the airspeed indicator go past 160 that night, and we were still on the ground. Those wheels were turning. But I was confident that this was the only way to do it so that I could control with the tail if I had to. So when I'm going down there and I kept it past that magic 140 that Lewis was used to, he started to grab the yoke, and pulled back on it. He said, lift it off. And I told him, I said, keep your damn hands off of that yoke. I'm flying this airplane.
Weather was very clear. We could see the coast of Japan from probably 75 to 100 miles away. And then I went up and looked over Tom's shoulder, and we compared notes in the city and made sure we had the right target, and picked out the bridge that was the aiming point, and then I went back and sat down. And it was in the bombardier's hands at that point.
But after flying as much as I had in Europe and planning missions from the very start, I knew a lot about picking up aiming points. It's something that I could pick up as a bombardier real easy. And that the bridge that I picked out was right almost in the center of the city. It made an ideal aiming point.
And then for 5 minutes, I was watching his head there, and he was looking at me and chewing on his cigar. And he said, ain't a damn thing I can do. Nothing. It's going right down the track. And he'd look up at the bomb site. It's on course. And it was on course until it left the airplane.
Well, I raised up a little and looked right out over the nose, and Paul immediately started to turn, but I could still see it because I wanted to make sure it was clear of the aircraft. Because I'd had some trouble with some that tumbled here that I was when I was at Wendover dropping them. So I wanted to make sure it was falling clear, and it was going straight in.
And we were still pretty close to it then, the mushroom cloud. It showed the cloud rising to about our level, which was in the neighborhood of 33,000 feet, if I remember right. And it also showed the turbulence engulfing the city and moving out into the foothills. And the only thing that I could see of Hiroshima was one of the docks and the bay.
Colonel Tibbets, will you tell us some of your reactions over the target?
Well, as the bomb left the airplane, we took over manual control, made an extremely steep turn to try and put as much distance between ourselves and the explosion as possible. After we felt the explosion hit the airplane, that is the concussion waves, we knew that the bomb had exploded, everything was a success, so we turned around to take a look at it. The sight that greeted our eyes was quite beyond what we had expected, because we saw this cloud of boiling dust and debris below us with this tremendous mushroom on top. Beneath that was hidden the ruins of the city of Hiroshima.
When we came back, we knew that war was over. There was no way that war could keep going on when what we saw had happened. But they would not admit to the fact. They didn't admit to Hiroshima. They finally admitted to Nagasaki, but even after they gave up, ceded, they didn't show any overt acts to stop the war. So it was necessary to have two bombs, and I think that we back on the ground that didn't fly the second mission were pretty doggone proud of that group of people too.
I think you have to say that you wish the war could have ended without flying missions of this type. But in the long run, I am thoroughly convinced that the use of this weapon did shorten the war and save lives overall, both Allied lives and Japanese lives. Because if you play what if, and you say what would have happened if the bomb had not have been dropped, and you start looking at, fire bombs would have continued, even without an invasion, the casualties would have been very, very heavy.
War is bad, horrible. And even in Europe, my intention over there is the same thing as Hiroshima, was to help get the war over, to end the killing.
It's a devastating thing. It came as a tremendous surprise. It shocked people. if people can see the attitude that we have, the patriotism we had at the time, the sincerity of our beliefs today, I wanted to do everything that I could to subdue Japan. That was the attitude of the United States in those years. That 509th Composite Group was a great group of patriotic men. They all put their backs to the wheel, and we succeeded in bringing that carnage to an end, and everybody got to go home. What you have just seen were the words that each individual wanted to express. There was no coaching, there was no written script, there was nothing. These questions were posed and the men answered them as you have seen it and heard it here. I do want to stress a couple of things. Number one, I think one of the most important aspects of this project was the secrecy and the way that it was maintained and kept. For years after the war had finished, investigators tried to pin a breach of security on the 509th Composite Group or the people or whatnot, and they failed to do it. There wasn't one done. The other thing I'd like to say is that when the project started, I became acquainted with a man by the name of Enola. He was my security officer. He belonged to Manhattan District, but he was at Wendover to head the security of the 509th Composite Group. Now, how serious were they? And I'll tell you, I'm going to word that to you just exactly the way he told me. His assignment before he came to Wendover was in Chicago, and he and another agent friend of his had an assignment to locate the mole inside of Enrico Fermi's laboratory down beneath the Chicago Stadium. There was somebody down there leaking information back that was going to Russia. I said, okay, Bud, what'd you do? He said, well, he said, those guys were kind of stupid. He said, they always met, every time they met the same place, which was about a block away from the university campus, underneath the street light. It was usually at night, 10 o'clock, 12 o'clock, or something like that. I said, well, how did you get a hold of it? How did you find out? He said, well, my buddy and I, we got a room in a hotel not too far from there, and through a little bit of hanky-panky and manipulation, we romanced the phone operator on the hotel line, and we put bugs on it. We listened to everything that those two guys said to one another, and they set up a meeting for this particular night. We listened and decided what we were going to do. I said, what was that? He said, well, they were going to meet somewhere around 11 o'clock, I think he said, in the same place. So my buddy and I, we got in our car and we drove and we parked maybe 50 to 75 yards away from that light in the darkness. I said, okay, what? He said, well, the guys came out and they met underneath that street light, so we each reached around, grabbed our rifles from the back seat, and we killed the bastards. That sounds a little bit funny today, but let me tell you, they were serious. Now, I said to him, I said, but isn't that kind of dangerous? What do you mean? He said, look, he said, who would pay any attention to a couple of stripped down dead stiffs laying in the gutter in Chicago at midnight? Okay, now that's how serious it was. I'll bring up another incident when we get out to Tinian. My friend Gary Newhouse here, an ex-Marine, he's my assistant. He's been my seeing eyes, and he's also my hearing aid. Go ahead, Gary.
Well, we've got an interesting group here in the audience, Paul. There's probably some physicists and engineers, and I know a lot of aviation historians and aviation buffs, so we should get some really tough questions. I hope you're up for it.
Okay.
How did you keep all those windows clean on the B-29?
I don't know. I just told the crew to clean them.
When did you realize you wanted to be a pilot?
Well, Lordy, that was a long time ago. I must have been about 6 or 7 years old at the most. And I saw an airplane flying. It was a World War I type airplane flown by a barnstormer up in Iowa. He belonged to some kind of a circus. And it was his duty to fly around the countryside, and all of the farms and small towns, and attract the people to come to the county seat where the thing was set up. And I just knew when I saw that I had to fly in an airplane. And I carried that on through. And when I was 12 years old, I got my first ride in an airplane. And that was flown by a famous racing pilot of those days who was also a good salesman. His name was Doug Davis. My father was in the wholesale confectionery business in Miami, Florida, and the Curtis Candy Company came out with a bar called the Baby Ruth. And he got the Baby Ruth or the Curtis people to sponsor him to fly around the different parts of the United States with Baby Ruth bars that had paper parachutes wrapped around them, throw them out over the assembled crowds and let them float down, and people grabbed that. That was the way to advertise. And that happened at my father's place on the occasion. He came down there to fly over Miami Beach, over the Hialeah racetrack and places like that. When the candy bars came in and the paper parachutes, they were not attached. So the object was to get them attached, and a couple of the people that worked in the warehouse, and I was one of the people. I didn't work in a warehouse, but I was so fascinated by Doug Davis, I watched everything he did. He's a man that could fly an airplane. And it came time to had the paper chutes all wrapped around the milk candy bars. And he said, he told to my father, he said, Miss Tibbets, I got to have somebody to fly with me to help throw these things out. And right then and there, I held my hand up and said, I will. My old man looked at me and he said, no, you won't. He'd been scared to death by a ride in an airplane in World War I, and he never forgot it. He was frightened by him. Doug said, look, Mr. Tibbets, he said, I got a wife and 2 lovely daughters. He said, I'm not going out there to kill myself. He won't get hurt. My dad had an understanding partner. He said, Paul, why don't you let the kid go with him? Well, the old man said, okay. And that's how I got my first ride in an airplane. It was a Waco 5. I rode in the front, threw parachutes over the beach, over the racetrack, and so forth. That was it.
When did you enlist in the Army?
It was in January of 37 at Fort Thomas, Kentucky. By that time, I'd reached the point. I'd already sneaked some of my allowance money, and I'd taken instructions to fly airplanes and so forth. I had soloed and had about 15 or 18 hours in my own logbook and all that kind of business. And by that time, I knew I had to fly. There was no question about it. I was supposed to have been a doctor, but this call of that airplane was much more than the call of being a physician.
Did you know General Patton personally, and what was he really like?
Well, I would answer it this way. Yes, I knew General Patton quite well when he was a lieutenant colonel. My first duty assignment was Fort Benning, Georgia, and he was there as an instructor in the infantry school. And I learned a good lesson from the man. Let's put it this way. He was depicted by different people as being some kind of a tyrant and so forth and so on, but I don't think that was the case. Now, one instant when Patton, had to demonstrate what a tank could do, we were all out on maneuver in the field on the Benning Reservation. I was standing by with a radio that could talk to the airplane because we were doing other things with the airplane, showing how an airplane and ground troops could coordinate things. I adjusted artillery fire from the back of one of them several different times. And with this particular instance, Patton got out in front of the students. There was bleachers there. Believe me, it was pouring down hot sun, I'm telling you, dusty and all that. he was out there in the front, and he was telling the troops about this tank that was sitting over there, that it was new to Fort Benning, but it was not a new tank. I don't know what it was, but he said, I can go 35 miles an hour across this ground out here. I'll hit trees that are 6 inches diameter, and I'll just lay them down like matchsticks. And he said, by the way, that house you see down there, kind of a slope away from the thing, he said, that house down there, he said, I'll get a run for that, and I'll hit that house, and I'll show you what'll happen. About that time, a sergeant walked over and started pulling on his sleeve. He said, Sergeant, let me alone. Can't you see I'm busy? Sergeant shrugged his shoulders, went back and sat down close to the tank. Patton finished his dialogue. He got started over to the tank, climbed up in it, got the engine running, revved it up, and he took off, and he raised more dust than you can imagine, up and down in front of the troops. And then he went back and he made a nice run from that thing, and as we faced him, he was running from right to the left. He hit that house, and bricks flew, dust flew, debris of all kinds of things. The tank didn't come out on the other side. It had a basement in it. Well, everybody ran down to, everybody was concerned about, maybe this man got killed. They all went down there, but by the time they got here, he was pushing boards out of the way, and he climbed out of that tank. He didn't say anything to anybody. That cap that he wore, he pulled that out of his breeches, I think he had it in his belt, and he pulled that out of there, and he started walking up the hill towards the microphone, dusting himself off. And when he got up there, he took the microphone, he said, gentlemen, if you didn't learn anything else today, I think you should have learned that it pays to listen to your sergeants.
Where were you when you heard Pearl Harbor was attacked?
Well, I had been in the North Carolina maneuvers at Fort Bragg. I was flying A-20s at the time, and I was the engineering officer. I was on the way back to Savannah, Georgia, my base. And being the engineering officer, I was the last airplane off of the ground. And gosh, it was a beautiful Sunday day, and the sun was shining, and I was riding along and listening to following the compass attached to tuned in to the local radio station at Savannah, follow the needle, and I'd get home. And all of a sudden, the announcer interrupted the program. He said, we have just been advised that the Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor. He said, as soon as we can get more information, we'll be back. And gosh, I don't know. I thought to myself, what the hell is Orson Welles doing now? That was my only thought. But anyway, I learned 20 minutes later I hit Savannah, and pandemonium was supreme.
Do you want a drink of water? That's not one of the questions, but I thought your mouth might be good.
I have to take water. Excuse me, I lost both of my salivary glands, and I got a mouth that's as dry as this rug. Go ahead, you can talk while I drink.
Is it true you led the first daylight raid over occupied Europe?
Over occupied what? Europe?
Did you lead the first daylight raid?
I don't know. I'll go get my 201 file and look it up. I think I did. That was a raid on Rouen, France, railroad marshalling yards. And I led all of 6 airplanes. We only had 12 airplanes in the air. 6 had gone some other place as a diversion, and they took us. We ran to bomb their marshalling yards. Now, that may sound strange, but there wasn't much going on over there at that time. We were the only B-17s in Britain, and that was in August of 42. Yeah, we did that. We were unopposed. The British escorted us with Spitfires. Oh, by the way, they did escort us with Spitfires, but some of their pilots were Polish pilots. And we noticed that as we got out and started to go across the channel, the fighters did not accompany us clear across because they didn't have enough fuel to do it and get back home. But out of mid-channel or something like that, some of these fighters turned around and went back. I asked one of the people that was in the bomber command down at High Wycombe, I said, how come those fighters turned around and went back? And this was a British group captain. He said, we find out that those Polacks all have a personal vendetta against the Germans. If we give them a full tank of fuel, they leave and go deeper into Germany and fight their own battle. We lose the man and we lose the airplane. We can't afford it.
Did you fly any missions in North Africa?
Yes.
Were they B-17 missions?
Yeah, they were B-17 missions, but we flew them like A-20s. Don't laugh. I was turned loose for the first time over there because I only had 6 airplanes down there. I'd flown General Eisenhower and his staff from England down to Gibraltar, and then when they secured Maison Blanche in Algiers, well, I took General Mark Clark and his people on into Algiers to set up their headquarters. Well, anyway, in this thing, we were sitting around and we were being harassed by the Ju-88s. They were coming over every night and they were dropping bombs and causing a lot of confusion and scaring us to death and all that sort of thing. And I got to thinking, well, gosh, I got 6 airplane crews here. Maybe I better do something. I went down to Mark Clark's headquarters, and Air Marshal Welch was his air officer. And when I went in there, the Air Marshal said, "What can I do for you?" And I said, "Sir, I got 6 B-17s sitting out here, and I think maybe we should help, work on this war deal." And he said, I think you're right. He said, "Why don't you?" I said, "Number 1, we don't have any fuel. Number 2, we don't have any bombs." So he called his aide, and he told the aide, he said, "Where can they get some fuel and where can they get bombs?" Well, we knew already where it's coming from. There's an shipping dock down there in Algiers that had aviation fuel on it. It also had 500-pound bombs. So he told the aide, he said, "Okay, get them a truck so they can go and unload the things that they need and load the airplanes up." It took us 2 days because loading a B-17 or 6 of them with 5-gallon tins is kind of a lot of hard work, I'll tell you. But anyway, we got there ready to go. We got the bombs in the airplanes, all that sort of thing. So I went back to the Air Marshal and I said, "Sir, we're ready to go." He said, "Jolly well." I said, "But we don't know what to go, where to go, and what to do." He said, "Well, go bomb Bizerta." I said, "Sir, we didn't bring any maps or anything with us. Where is Bizerta?" He said, "Just a minute." He called his aide. He said, "Can you get a map that will show Bizerta?" "Yes, sir." Aide came back in a few minutes, laid this out in front of the Air Marshal, pointed down, said, "There's Bizerta." So Air Marshal said, I moved over and he said, "There's Bizerta." And I saw Bizerta, but I also saw a Standard Oil road map. That's what we went on our first mission, with Standard Oil road map. But, there wasn't anything we couldn't do. And I told my navigator, Van Kirk, I said, "Dutch, I tell you what we're going to do. We're going to stay behind the hills. We're going to fly terrain. I don't want those Germans." They had an airport there with a German fighter squadron on it, about a mile or a mile and a half back of the docks, on an incline that would get steeper and steeper and become about 4,000-foot hills. And I said, "We'll do that." We planned to do the thing at roughly the noon hour because we felt that we needed the daylight, we needed all that we could get and fly there, that route to get there. And we did just exactly that. The second element of 3 airplanes behind me was flown by a young man. Jesse Weichel was his name. I said, "Jesse, you follow me and you have your airplanes drop their bombs on the airdrome. I'm going to cross the airdrome with my 3 and bomb the docks. I'll make a left-hand turn and we'll join formation and come on home." "Yes, sir." And that's exactly what we did. We got a little opposition, small arms fire. Wasn't anything drastic. We'd had a lot worse over Germany and Europe, over occupied France and in Europe. So with this particular situation, I never heard another word about it until 1953, when I was in NATO and assigned to Allied Air Forces Central Europe with headquarters in Fontainebleau, France. The first Germans to be admitted to the NATO staff were assigned there. And one of these Germans came time to enter, it was in the plans section, and they were assigned there too. So introductions took place, and I introduced myself to these fellows as they came around. One of these Germans says, "I know you. You flew the Red Grumman. You're in the 97th Bomb Group." I looked at him. He said, "Don't you know," he said, "the German habit was whenever they opposed an organization, whether it was American or anything else, and that organization in front of them moved anywhere, the Germans would move their outfit in the same place so that the commanders of the German outfit could anticipate maybe some of the things that were going to be done. He said, do you know what you did that day? And I said, I have no idea. I never saw a report on it, and I never saw a photograph. He said, well, he said, you wiped out one of Goring's best fighter squadrons. He said, you got a direct hit on the mess hall at noon and killed them all.
Having served in both Europe and the Pacific theaters, did you see any large or major differences between the bombing campaigns between the two, Germany and Japan?
Well, I'd have to say that. Yes, I did. There was quite a difference. A few men and you people that have read, you know that everything was really structured. And they ran the campaign in Europe. They run it like a big corporation would run anything. Everything was planned and run from the headquarters, the bomber command, and all that sort of thing, and done on a very timely basis. Now in Europe, it's in the Pacific when we got out there, they were structured, but basically the same way. But you had a different problem because number one, they had to fly over water. They had to get up over the targets there. And many of you men will remember that the B-29s of those days were rather, say, weak type airplanes. We had a lot of problems with them. Engines overheated, they swallowed valves, they did all kinds of things that caused you to have to abort. So with that, but the one thing that was different, if all of that happened to you, at least you weren't freezing to death. You were comfortable in a pressurized compartment, and that was quite a good thing. When it came time to get my own airplanes to go with the 509 composite group, it's a different problem. We'll touch that in a minute.
Did you teach two women to fly the B-29, and why?
I'll confess I did. I taught two of them to fly it. The reason I taught them was because I was approached from a two-star general from General Arnold's office, and this was in I think April or something like that of '44. Maybe it was May, I don't know. I never kept a diary. And this man said that we got a bunch of airplanes down at Clovis, B-29s, and they can't get any utilization out of them. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, he said, people down there to fly them all say that if you lose an engine, you're going to get killed, and it's dangerous. Well, I said, well, I don't know. I had lost a lot of engines in 15 months of testing the damn things. It didn't kill me yet. But anyway, I said, he said, can you do anything about it? I said, yes, sir, I can, because immediately I thought of something. Let me train two women. We'll go down there and we'll show those football heroes what those two women can do with that airplane on two engines. They'll start flying them. And that's exactly what we did. I would have to tell you one other thing. The two were volunteers. They just loved what they were doing. It was a challenge. And there were two women, Dora Doherty and Dee Dee Mormon. Dora was an Illinois farm girl, rather husky person. Dee Dee Mormon was a little more dainty and that sort of thing. But anyway, Dee Dee said, look, I don't want to sit in the left seat. I want to be Dora's co-pilot. I said, fine, that cuts the problem in half. And I didn't tell them that. I just kept. And so that's the way we started. Now, I gave those girls transition 4 hours every morning and 4 hours in the afternoon. When we lost engines or anything happened, we landed, because we were flying out of Birmingham at the McCone Bechtel Parsons Modification Center, and there was 100 airplanes on the ramp there all the time being modified so that they could be used overseas. So we had plenty of time. We did that flying. And when we did this, I think it was 5 days. First day we did it, now remember, this is summertime. And I don't know how many of you sat in a B-29 had been parked in the summer sun, you know, from the time the sun came up until 10 o'clock in the morning. But that's what we encountered. And on the first day we went out, those girls perspired. Oh my God, they were just, those blue suits they had on turned black. And they were working like Trojans. Dee Dee was my engineer. He ran completely out of any kind of rags that he had. They were clean because they were wiping each other off. Well, they solved that problem the second day because when they left the hotel to come out, they brought bath towels with them. But we did. I worked them, and I got them into a system with the help of my engineer, I got them into a system where they take the airplane off. Once the wheel broke the ground, they would feather number 3, the inboard engine. When the flaps and the gear were in the well, they feathered the engine beside it and kept right on going, right on out. And they mastered that thing quick. I could show Dora Dory something one time and she could repeat it. And I think she was a great pilot. She left the service and became the director of Humanics Bell Helicopter. She retired there about 5 years ago after being 30 years with them. She set 14 feminine records in helicopters while she was there doing that. So they were good. They went to Clovis, and down there, when they took the chief pilot, they took the squadron commander and 2 other pilots with them on the first ride. Now the commander of that organization, I can't remember, but he was an old airline captain. And when I told him what was going to happen, he started laughing. He said, "God damn, I got to go out and watch this one." And so he was there when they landed, and these guys, a couple of these guys got out, and boy, they were mumbling and talking to themselves and all that sort of thing. One of them took his wings off and threw it down on the ground. He says, "I'm through." Another one went in, the operations officer took his off and said, "I'm through." And the colonel followed him in. He said, "Gentlemen, I think you got another second thought on that one. You're not through till we tell you." But anyway, it changed things, and they went from something to 2 hours plus on their utilization of airplanes. They went over to 7 hours in 1 week's time. So that tells you what was going on. They were mentally defeated before they ever got in the airplane and started, and they canceled on any kind of excuse. They canceled the mission.
And both women are still alive today, and Paul gets to see them occasionally, which is really nice.
You wouldn't expect me to go turn my back on those girls,
Well,
would you?
they're awful pretty.
Okay.
How many missions did you fly prior to the big one? I'm not sure what the big one is, but...
Well, if by the record, I flew 26 bombing missions before that one. Those were in Europe or out of England and North Africa. I flew into the enemy's territory several different times, hauling dignitaries around, but that was it.
They didn't ask any questions, no one in the audience, about the atomic mission at all. No,
Well,
I'm just teasing you.
Well, I'll tell them in a minute.
All right, I'm just going to run down these now, if you're ready. Were you on Guadalcanal?
No.
How did your mother feel about having her name associated with such a historic mission?
Well, my father had to tell me after I got back home, after the war was over with, and my mother she was a very quiet type person, but whenever she got amused and tickled about something, her stomach would jiggle, her face wouldn't change. He said, "You ought to seen the old girl's belly jiggle."
At the 50th anniversary of the first atomic test, I was interviewed by a Japanese film crew. I was told there was no warning of the Hiroshima incident or mission. Is that true?
Nothing could be more true. You don't tell the enemy what you're going to do and when you're going to do it. The element of surprise is one of the key articles of war, for goodness sakes.
This was someone asked, wanted to know how old you were.
When?
Well, I'm not going to ask. I won't ask you that.
Well, okay, when I flew that mission, I was 30 years old. When I got the job, I was 29.
What was the name of the second plane that dropped the bomb on Nagasaki?
Boxcar.
I'm not
trying to shortchange you, but he's got a handful to go through here.
How many cities were candidates besides Hiroshima for the first mission?
Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Kokura, and Niigata. Those were, for both airplanes, they were the initial choices. Of course, you only had a primary and a secondary. Well, you had a tertiary, but that worked out. We eliminated Hiroshima.
Did you know any technical details about the device you dropped beforehand?
About what?
Well, they state device. I imagine they're talking about the bomb.
Oh, you're talking about the little boy.
Who asked
this question? I must mean the
They're
little
talking
boy.
about the bomb.
Yeah, little boy. Let me put it this way. I had a good layman's education on it. all of the scientific things, and no, I did not know. I didn't need to know them to fly the bomb and let it go.
I'm trying to get these in some kind of chronological order.
You're not doing a good
No,
job.
I'm not doing a good job. I'm sweating a little bit too. On the day Little Boy was dropped, did you have a vision of the impact it would have on world politics?
Absolutely not, neither did anybody else. Those visions came anywhere from 5 to 50 years later, so no, I didn't. I knew it was going to do a lot of damage, but there's no way that I could imagine, because I was told it would explode with the strength of 20,000 tons of TNT. I'd never seen 1 ton of TNT, let alone 20. I'd never seen any poundage of TNT explode. So what did I do? I just took, one of the big 2,000-pound bombs that were used in Europe. They made a big bang, and I said, well, this was going to be bigger.
Were you actually told this bomb cost $2 billion? If you don't drop it, don't come back? That's a good one. I like that one.
No. Again, that's one of those figures that was not known till long after the war was over with. Nobody knew how much money went into it, and I wonder if they know today on that basis. But let me put it this way. There was nothing that would have deterred me. They could have offered me $2 million to abort, and I wouldn't have done it.
Why was the little boy's gun and uranium shell sent to Tinian by boat when all the other parts were sent by air?
Well, I think there's a mix-up there. First off, the uranium was sent in 2 pieces. Number one, half of that uranium for that bomb was sent by air, and the other half was sent in a steel box welded to the deck of the Indianapolis. The other parts were carried over by some of our airplanes and some of Matt's airplanes, as long as we didn't do something that have to put something on a manifest that would cause the Matt's people to raise their eyebrows.
Where was the Fat Man assembled?
Well, some of it was done in Wendover. It was, the parts and pieces were divided up among airplanes, and they were flown out there. So there was so little of it. You couldn't put all your eggs in one basket, is what it amounted to. So we did the final assembly at Tinian in our armament shack.
Where are you currently living? I got this out of order, I'm sorry.
Columbus, Ohio.
Did you know Bill Hartshorn?
I can't connect it, no.
They thought it was one of your pilots.
It could have been. I didn't know everybody in that outfit. I confess I didn't know, because I didn't get to spend too much time with them. I knew the people who were on the first 2 airplanes, and I knew the crews that were going to fly the next two more had to be flown.
Have you visited Hiroshima?
No, never had a reason to.
Here's a good one. Flying between Tinian and Japan, did you have a chance to sleep?
Well, I didn't, because look, I had the responsibility to make the thing work, and my concern until that bomb exploded all the way through the flight was, have I made any mistakes anywhere? And of course, the greatest relief I could breathe was when the bomb did explode. There were no mistakes that had been made.
When you first dropped the bomb and it exploded, what were you thinking? Were you surprised at the size of the explosion?
Well, first off, nobody knew about the size of the explosion. We had accelerometers in the airplane, and when the bomb was dropped, basically my back was towards it. My tail gunner saw the shock wave coming. He said, here it comes, and he just got that word out of his mouth, and the first wave hit us. The accelerometer registered that one, which was 2.5 Gs. Another one came, we felt it, and a third one was behind it. We all waited, but nothing happened. You couldn't feel it.
Was there any fighter cover on your way to Hiroshima or over the target?
No, there was no fighter cover of any kind. As a matter of fact, all airplanes in the 20th Air Force were in that part of the Pacific Theater were ordered to be at least 400 miles away from Hiroshima during a certain time period, and that would be the time period that we would get there. We didn't have any fighters. Well, there were some fighters on Okinawa by that time, but no, we didn't want fighters. I didn't need them. What people don't know is that I've had the authority, and I got 15 B-29s off of the production line, had them taken to Offutt Field where the manufacturer, Martin Company, had established a modification center to take care of just those airplanes. We stripped 7,200 pounds of armament out of them. We didn't need any guns or armament. We left them in the tail. And I did that on the basis that I had run just before I got that assignment. As a matter of fact, when I got the word to go to see General Ent, we were just finishing a test that was run by the University of New Mexico physics department on the vulnerability of the B-29 to fighter attack. They had 2 Zeros, they had 2 Messerschmitts, they used the Spitfires, they had all of the American fighters, and in that test I found out that not one of them could touch the B-29 with one exception if we had 30,000 feet. And that's what I wanted, was altitude. I wasn't afraid of the Japanese anti-aircraft because it was nothing like the accuracy of the Germans. And it proved out in these tests that if the fighter got up high enough before he saw us coming and made an attack, he could not recover and catch us. So he had one opportunity to make an attack, and I was willing to gamble on that one.
What went through your mind when you saw how many people were killed by the bomb?
Well, you tell me how many people were killed by the bomb. Nobody knows. It was inflated like so many things. Now, there were a bunch of people killed, I'll tell you for sure, because Hiroshima was the assembly point for the material that would be used to oppose an American or an Allied invasion of Japan. And there were all kinds of people. Now, when something goes on someplace in one of our cities, people go into it and nobody takes a head count. So I don't think anybody knew. The first statistic I saw said we killed 40,000 people, and after that, it went right on up. The last I read was 200,000. And I just, my answer was BS. I don't believe it.
Did you favor the openness supported by Niels Bohr, or the secrecy supported by Groves?
Well, I don't know.
Niels
what Niels Bohr did, but Groves' secrecy was adhered to, and I certainly believed in that secrecy. There's no question about it. It didn't inhibit our work.
You want to get some water while I'm working on this?
Okay, thank you. He's taken such a long time. If anybody here's got a question, well, come on up.
I hope you can be here a while. This is a good question. How do you feel about the academic revisionists by people who were not even born in 1945?
These people don't want to hear what I got to say because some ears are too young to hear it.
We are presenting a mock trial at school. Truman will be on trial. What are your arguments for and against dropping the bomb?
Well, I would tell you this seriously. That bomb had to be dropped. There was no question about it because the potential was there to bring the killing to an end. That was evident. It was already known. We knew and so forth. I knew before I took off that the Japanese had condemned 20,000 prisoners of war to death on September the 15th and September the 30th. So now, with that being done, if they're going to murder 15,000 people at each one of those days, Truman had to make a decision. The next thing is, you can get all kinds of ideas about, well, they were ready to give up and quit. Nobody told the Japanese they were ready to get up and quit. They had been born and raised to die for the emperor. And the emperor wasn't running the war until the last couple of days because he had an imperial staff. You see, this man was a god. He couldn't use and think about ordinary life things. So his imperial staff, who were samurais, they were the ones that made the policy, and they were the ones that did the major things in that regard. And we know today, and I think you will support this idea, they had no intention of giving up until the second bomb was used and we convinced the emperor of the futility of continuing to fight. And that's when he got on the radio and says, I don't want my people to endure any more of this.
Did the crew of the Enola Gay have emotional or personal problems after the mission?
No, not at all. Nobody lost a night's sleep.
How many bombs were on Tinian?
Well, at any one time, actually there were 1.5 at any one time. The third bomb never got out there, even though LeMay asked me to get it out there. The surrender was official before we could get the airplane from. We got it as far as Moffett Field in California when the war was over, and it was turned around and sent back to Wendover with the bomb.
Do you think the people who were most critical of your mission would think differently if they were aware of the Japanese atrocities against both civilian and military personnel, as much as the public was made aware of the German atrocities? To this day, many people are still not aware of the Japanese atrocities.
Well, let put it, you're talking about a theoretical thing, and my belief is this, that if people had known, and if they stopped to think today, I think that they would agree with what the decision that, Truman made, that it was necessary to use that bomb. God knows how many thousands of people we would have lost. As a matter of fact, they tell me that in Washington today, they're still handing out Purple Hearts. After everything has happened since that war, they're still handing out Purple Hearts that were ordered for that invasion.
What happened to the rest of your crew? Do you ever see them anymore?
Well, the answer is, unfortunately, some of them died. There were 10 of us as permanent party on that crew. 5 are dead. There's one man, Captain Parsons, USN, who was the weaponeer. He died. He was the first one to die. So right now, we got 5 people left. 4 of us see each other frequently, the bombardier, the navigator, and the radio operator. Matter of fact, we were together, 3 weeks ago in Wichita Falls for a reunion of the survivors of Iwo Jima. And the other man was the assistant to Captain Parsons. His name was Morris Jepson. Morris disappeared right after the war was over with. I saw him and talked to him 2 years, well, coming up on 3 years this August, when the 509th had a reunion in Dayton, Ohio, and Morris came to that, and he said, I never knew that there was a 509th reunion organization, or I would have been there. Okay, he's joined up with us. We'll see him again before too long.
How long did you fly after you dropped the atomic bomb? I don't know if they're saying how long did you fly back or...
Well, I mean, let's take it this way. I mean, it could mean how many years did you keep going and quit flying, or it could mean how long did it take you to get back home. Well, it was rough. The round trip was 13 hours and 5 minutes, and most of that, I would say, more than half of it was on the way up, coming back light. We had the advantage of gravity and downhill and a lighter airplane. We didn't have to pull so much power, and we did that. I had to quit flying. When I got out of the Air Force in '66, I helped start a Learjet air taxi service in Columbus, Ohio, and I flew Learjets until 1985. And by that time, I couldn't understand the controllers, especially if they came from New Jersey when I was in lunch. I said, by that time I'd flown 54 years, so I gave it up voluntarily.
Tell us about your grandson in the 509th today.
Well, Paul IV is a B-2 pilot. He's a fine young man. I tell you, I don't know what to tell you except, you know, what would a person feel about something like that? My 2 sons did not go into the service. One of them wanted to, but had a bad eye and he couldn't. The other one, he was the youngest one, he said, I'm not going to have anybody tell me what to do. And I said, okay, you'll learn. But anyway, I tell, with my grandson, I told him right straight to his face, I said, Paul, he's Paul the Fourth. I said, Paul, you're more sophisticated than I ever dreamed that anybody could be. You know more about your equipment that you're flying than I ever thought anybody could know. And no matter what, you'll never have as damn much fun flying an airplane as I did.
Have you flown with your grandson?
No, I've been in a simulator with him, but they wanted me to get up into one of those airplanes. I'll tell you, you can't crowd in that thing. I had a hard time getting in there with shoehorns and help and everything else. I couldn't bend my legs the right time enough to get into that thing. But I had a simulator ride, and it was very realistic. He flew it. He wanted me to fly it. I said, I won't touch it.
What's the current status of the Enola Gay?
Well, that's an interesting thing, and I will tell you that when we had our reunion in Dayton last August, just as we were finishing the thing, the chairman of the reunion called attention to everybody and said, I just got off the telephone with Admiral Ingman, director of the Air Space Museum in Washington, D.C. He said to tell you, the 509, that very afternoon, a man that he knew and would not name, that this man asked him how much money is it going to take to restore that airplane. And Ingman had a pretty good answer because he'd already been trying to come up with $5 million plus to do it. And he told this man, he gave that man the number that he had. The man sat down, wrote him a check for that amount plus 10% and said, I want to see the damn thing restored in a hurry. And that's what they're doing. They got the money, there's no problems, and they hired the people, they got the technical skill that they need, and they're going to restore it. But they still say it's going to take 2 years.
They're going to put it right back?
Where are they going to put it?
Well, that's a good argument. I don't know. I don't think anything will take it away from Washington, D.C. I will also tell you I don't think it should go anywhere but Washington, D.C. because there are more tourists in the world and in the United States go to Washington, D.C. than any other place.
We homeschool our 3 boys. How do you feel about the revisionists and how they present things in American museums today?
Well, I would only tell you this, that I have spoken out, and I've been known for being outspoken. I've always spoken out and said, we've got to get, we parents have to get more interested in what our children are being taught in school. Because when you take and get a history book, I got one in, what was it, 88, I think it was. I got a history book in my hand that was used in Michigan to teach high school history. And in there, they had 1 page and 1/2 on World War II. I don't know how you tell, 4 years of war or anything that leading up to it, how you do it in 1.5 pages. The other thing is, these people are trying to gain mind control over our youth so that they can get them to think and come up with the conclusions they want them to come up with, which are contrary to what history says as we know it.
Do you still skeet shoot, and what do you do to stay busy? And that's the last question.
That's 2 questions.
Well,
I am not a golfer. I have always been ever since I was 12 years old, I have shot clay targets with shotguns, and I still do it today. I love that game, and yes, I do. And what was the other half?
what do you do?
Oh,
to
what do
stay
I do
busy?
to keep my time? I'm telling you what I did to spend my money.
What do you do to stay busy now?
Well,
aside from traveling all over the world.
I try to evade my wife's directions to do this, do that, or something else, and that keeps me pretty busy. What do you say?
Can I tell him something? My office is about 4 miles from Paul's house.
15 minutes.
15 minutes. He has it timed exactly. And on any given day, I'll get a phone call in the morning. Paul's an early riser, and I'm in the office by 7:30, and Paul, the phone will ring, and it'll be Paul, and he'll say, Andrea has some things she wants me to do today. What are you doing for lunch? And then what can we do after that to stay busy so I could not have to go home?
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I think probably it's time to bring a halt to this session, but I want to say one thing in closing, and that is there will never be another situation like that atomic bomb and the 509th Composite Group. It just won't happen. It can't happen. You see, we had no media. General May kept them all on Guam. We didn't have television. We didn't have satellites and all that sort of thing, so it won't happen. But I can say one thing, that there will be no individual in any of the Department of Defense that had the authority that I had when I was putting that project together. I had no boss. I could do damn well what I pleased. Thank you.
Great to have you, Paul.
Huh?
Great to have you.
Thank you.
Brigadier General Paul Tibbets.
Thank you.
What an amazing man. What an amazing set of stories, and what an amazing wit. Well, now we need to see our lovely assistants down front for the raffle. If you would come down, Shauna and Vicki. These are two fine ladies who work for the National Atomic Museum Foundation. We don't have Carol Merrill. Now, how are you going to do this? Okay, that sounds fine.
Okay, everybody get their tickets ready. We're going to have you pick up the prizes up front. And mix them up. Okay, the first number, 274693. Okay. Number 2, 274817. You got it? Okay. Number 3, 274631. We'll get them up front. Number 4, 274603. Number 5, 274488. Halfway through. Number 6, 274485. Number 7, 274848. Number 8, 274449. Number 9,